Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Dave, how you doing, man?
Not so bad.
Uh-huh.
Just having life problems, but that happens to all of us. I
Yeah, it
have more
does.
news than I know what to do with.
Wow, what's the top of your mind today?
Uh, well, Europol, that's the Police Association but International, has put out a thing about how ChatGPT is actually being used for illegal stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, please. I mean,
Uh,
I took a brief look at that story. I mean, it's amazing the ways that it can be used, and I didn't realize that it is being used in these ways. But please talk a little bit about what they're saying. This is in Europe, right, Dave?
no, the U.S. is a big part of Interpol. Think of all
Okay.
your mystery shows on the TV that send us get something or send something to Interpol.
Mm-hmm.
Although those may be Europol. Yes, this is Europol, not Interpol, but they're all interconnected. Uh, these are everybody in the field, starting with the CEO of ChatGPT, going to the CEO of Google, going to all the people introducing the product managers, know about these problems. Many people thought that was why Google held off, although there's some other problems there too. We don't really understand. We understand what ChatGPT is doing. We don't understand what is happening on each individual query.
Mm.
Uh, in other words, we don't know what's happening really when you get an answer. And there's been lots of things that have been put in the press that were obvious errors.
Dave,
Talking about
just quickly for folks who maybe haven't been following this thread, we've been talking about it for a while here on Community and Technology. Chat GPT is a new software program that is a generative program. It's capable of processing and generating human-like text in response to prompts, whether it be typed-in prompts or visual prompts, etc. Does that summarize basically what it does?
there's so much more.
Yeah.
So let me give you a little bit more. I could right now tell ChatGPT what would be a good excuse to give Stu for my not logging in on time this afternoon. 600 words. And I would get something with perfect grammar,
Mm-hmm.
logical, sensible. It may or may not have anything to do with me and Stu. Usually it does.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. Next thing you can do. Yes, you can do all kinds of things like that, and they are, including the doctors. Uh, but the crooks can find them too. And we now have the news that some smart crooks are using it. There's a new profession of people whose job is just to figure out what prompts you give to ChatGPT or their equivalents. Uh, there's actually only one in production. No, there are two in production. Uh, and they're going to be at least four more,
Mm-hmm.
which is very different than what I said here on the air a few weeks ago. At that point, the only large language model out there, this computer program, was it ChatGPT, which is part of OpenAI. And everything they said is that training it on a trillion data points,
Mm.
not a billion, a trillion, took a heck of a lot of computer time. And they made a deal. The first deal was with Microsoft for 1 million, and not a billion, rather. And
A
that
billion
wasn't
dollars.
delivered. And the next one was 10 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's an investment, but a lot of it went to the computer time. So we all thought that, heck, that kind of computer time, who has hundreds of millions of dollars in order to build one of these models? Well, Microsoft does, Google does, Salesforce, or Salesforce is trying to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's being done in Korea, and it went in production on Baidu.
China.
The Chinese equivalent of Google, a $50 billion company. So they've got the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And they, for years, have been one of the leaders. In fact, they've been racing Google to who can have the best language translation program. And one would have say, we just did this. The other would say, 3 months later, but we beat you. And it's gone back and forth a few times.
Yeah, so, just another quick point of information. Large language model is a type of AI system that can process, manipulate, and generate text. I just want to throw that out there because we tend to use a lot of buzzwords here, David. Our listeners don't always know what the heck we're talking about.
Absolutely. And if I do anything like that, keep correcting me, because I know that most of the people watching this show or listening to this show are not computer geeks. They're people. That always happens on the radio. Okay.
Well, you're talking about the Chinese now getting involved in this ChatGPT.
Huawei has it available on their cloud servers. In other words, for businesses that are working with Huawei. It's not public, but it's out there and working. And Baidu yesterday came up with their model, put it out public, put it out in beta testing, and everybody in China started testing it. But at the end of the day, they discovered they had so many problems. I was just talking about the errors that are sometimes there, that they better pull it back. And they turned it off, at least for outside users, and they're going to be fixing a whole lot of things. Google was also really bad. Google came out a few weeks ago. And on Google, when people started going to it, they just found too many problems and errors. So everybody's going back, fixing things. But one of the things you learn about machine learning with the machines, and we're talking about giant computers, giant, like 6 football field size.
Wow.
It's the kind of servers that Baidu or Huawei is putting on it. That this stuff is challenging and won't be able to come for millions. Now, the interesting thing, beside who's playing in it, is some Stanford graduate students, instead of taking 1 trillion data points, found the right 50,000 data points, and it can give you an answer to things like your homework. And it's fine and not that much worse than the $100 billion or $400 billion model of ChatGPT.
How's that work, Dave? How do they do that?
They don't know. I don't know. There's lots of theories. No, when I say they don't know, the way the software works is you throw a heck of a lot of data at it, and you have things trained. That's what the machine learning programs are all about. On that data, it goes into that data and looks for the patterns, looks for what's connected to what, and figures out those relationships, which is why I say we don't know. The people using this stuff have no way to find out when they're doing anything complicated in this stuff what the computer actually did. So there's loads of theories. This all happened, incidentally, in the last 4 years, and machine learning and everything has happened in the last 13 years. The one that happened, where I say 4 years ago, was a remarkable paper by 15 people at Google who introduced the idea of transformers of the T in GPT. And what they do is they take your input, say the audio of this show, transform it into a meta symbol that is no exact language, but is like a language, but is also semantically perfect. And then tell the computer to output it in Chinese. No, give it to me in French. No, give it to me in Egyptian. And it can just do it. So the name comes from those transformers, and they were introduced to the world in a paper by Google about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And AI and machine learning people were really excited. But when it got to people, and I knew what it was in theory, when it came out last November with ChatGPT showing just what it could do, and it was amazing. A college professor said that the papers it created were probably better than the ones his students were doing. That may not be always true.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it can't do arithmetic very well. There's a big problem. Yeah, they don't know why. They're working on
it. You would think that would be the first thing they'll figure out, just numbers. You would think it'd be good at that. I would think that anyway.
Giving you an answer is something far beyond my competence right now. Mm-hmm. But it's not just text. I made the example here. We can take the audio of this show and the video of this show we're starting to see. One of the impressive, not words, things that has just come out, SD, what does SD stand for? One of the companies in California has put out their model. It's been out like ChatGPT. ChatGPT put it, everybody got excited, including people in the White House. Mm-hmm. And obviously many people in China and Russia as well. And they put their model out a few weeks later, which, like ChatGPT's, really could have used another year or two of work. But if they didn't put it out, they'd be out of the business pretty quick. And what it can do is it does a marvelous job making photos and drawings. Mm-hmm. I held up on the show a few weeks ago a complete oversized comic book, which looked like a professional comic book in every way. Didn't write it. It made all the drawings based on what was written and a few different prompts. Mm. No artist touched that. And it was, I don't know, 60 pages or something like that. Today, well, since yesterday, there's been a photo that's been going around. It went all over Instagram, according to the news story. What was that photo? It was the Pope Francis, like this, with a white puff jacket. You know, the ones who make you look like the Michelin man?
Yes, yeah.
And it looked so good, I thought it was real. Now, I didn't look that closely. It wasn't. They were able to reproduce his face on the clothes that they had from something else. Mm-hmm. Good enough that many people, me included, didn't realize it was didn't really exist. Mm-hmm. The Pope does not wear the Michelin man jackets. Mm-hmm. He's got some very fancy clothes that the church provides for him.
Now, David, I want to get back to what, in that vein, you first introduced a concern raised by Europol in their tech white flag that talked about some of the stuff that criminals are starting to do with this type of generative software, ChatGPT and others. And I'm just looking at one of the stories, and they have 3 areas that they talk about. This is Europol. They talk about fraud and social engineering, where the software can impersonate the style and speech of individuals or groups. That's kind of scary.
Does it have an example?
No, it doesn't. It just says
Let me give you an example.
Okay.
The example could be David Burstein's letter from the bank. Send it in 20 versions with different banks in each. Add to it an invoice with 60 invoices. Make the letter look exactly like the real bills and statements from each of those banks.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely doable right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the second area that they identified as a place for criminal activity is disinformation, where they say ChatGPT excels at producing authentic sounding text at speed and scale, and it makes an ideal tool for propaganda and disinformation purposes.
I believe there is another large language model in the US security agencies that they haven't talked about publicly.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a guess. There's nothing official on that. But the US security has that level of tracking, and they do a lot of AI now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What could that do?
I just want to put this out, and then you can tell me some of your experience with some of the actual examples. Cybercrime is a third area that Europol identified that ChatGPT and I guess some of the other software as well is capable of producing code in a number of different programming languages. And the potential for criminal mischief is large. I mean, I don't know if we've seen any examples yet, but this is an area that they've identified.
Yes, we have.
Yes, where?
There is an example that a researcher put together, taking some principles of malware and said, give me a program that could break into this computer. And ChatGPT did it.
Wow.
Microsoft, in fact, is selling or giving away, depending on how you're coming to them, the basis of that program, which writes computer programs for you. As I say, it's not just about ordinary text.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the word for most of the people who've tried it is, well, it's not perfect. You usually have to go in and make a fix or two. But you realize how close. And the other thing is it will get better incredibly fast.
Mm-hmm.
1 million people signed up in 3 days for ChatGPT. Most of them tried it out with examples. If the text that you sent did not match what you wanted it to send, you put in a little note about it, not acceptable. So the computer automatically, to 10,000 of those notes or 100,000 of those notes, went back into the model using the information. This is not correct. To triple check it. And it reduced the number of errors. One of the things that's very welcome in that is something that may or may not be thought of an error. Horrible things to say. Totally hateful sentences or pieces that could go to the Daily Stormer and print tomorrow. Lots of that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, why it's so powerful in propaganda? Because what you do with propaganda is pick up something I have, a list of 200 tech reporters around the world. That's straightforward. Most of them handle English, but you don't need to for this. You take a story that is not true, misinformation. Mm-hmm. And the New Yorker this week has an astounding article that blew me away on how some people in Switzerland were doing this, being paid millions of dollars by the United Arab Republics. And some hacker got into their computer, and that's why we know what was going on, for sure. That is amazing. And of course, what happened with the 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 different things they sent out? Well, reporters are sometimes tired or lazy. It looked very good. there was lots of links to the past history of the people involved, some of which was pretty dubious. In fact, one of the principals on that had been convicted of money laundering 10 years before. So the reporters looked at it and said, I got to get 3 pieces out this afternoon. I'm taking this one. And there have numerous examples who picked up this completely false story, including the Times of London.
Mm.
Still one of the grandest newspapers in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I've seen this kind of campaign. We talk about it, and there's certainly a lot of people in China or Russia or the Ukraine using these tools for their purposes. And there's certainly probably even more people in the United States, many of them in Maryland and Nevada, who are doing the same thing. We have the NSA, we have the CIA. They're out there spying.
Mm-hmm.
That's what spies do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me think. Let me make sure I put this right. Let me hold off on that till after the break.
Okay, I wanted your reaction to TikTok just came out. We're talking about misinformation, talking about the Pope dressed up like the Michelin Man and with some.
But white. The Michelin Man at least was blue, but this was bright white.
But TikTok just came out and they banned deep fakes of non-public figures and fake endorsements. Of course, deepfake is just what you're talking about, where some avatar or a visual or is put together where it's takes a real person and marries it to something that's not real, and basically gives you a fake image or a fake impression. And TikTok has apparently banned this, at least for non-public figures. Apparently, you can still do it for public figures. Well, what's that about, Dave?
Well,
I mean, why
that's full satire in the U.S. court system.
Okay.
If you make a picture of somebody looking funny, that's been used in political cartoons for 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
They were the great political cartoons of the 19th century in England.
Right.
So that's a little bit harder, although I suspect they're moving. Okay. OpenAI, or their equivalent at Google, has 100 or 3,000. We don't know precisely. It's probably closer to 100 OpenAI, and by now 3,000 at Google is trying to catch up. Literally 3,000 people working on this. They know they have the problem of some inaccuracies, and they even have a name for it. When it puts out something that sounds right but is totally wrong, they don't call it misinformation or an error. They call it a hallucination.
Really?
Yeah, that's the word among the people who are making this stuff. The errors are called hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many of them have been caught, thousands or hundreds of thousands, fed back in and fixed. As I was saying before, these programs are going to get better and better incredibly fast. We know that because that's already been happening. ChatGPT is on version 4, and that's in 2 years, 3 years, and each one is a big improvement. And they know it's a big improvement because they have a whole lot of test problems of which of these 2,000 pictures is a cat and which of these is a dog. And it's almost perfect on that kind of thing. So it's going. But the other thing is, I won't put the name on this, but let me flag one. A relative of mine was going to Columbia a few years after I did. And it was just to make conversation. I talked about some of the professors that I had really liked and whether she had had them. Perfectly ordinary, comfortable conversation. But then I put in the great scholar of Conrad in 19th century British literature. His name was Edward Said. And I know he's a great scholar because I took his class and learned an awful lot. That's when I first started to understand T.S. Eliot. But he also is a Palestinian who, among other things, served on the Palestinian National Committee. Is that what it was? The one that was semi-official for 20 years and set up the two states in the occupied territories.
Okay.
And he has become totally hated by the people who are angry about what the Palestinians are doing. Now, I assure you, there's plenty of things Israelis is doing that not merely Palestinians would be awfully angry about. I would, and so would 110 members of the United Nations. I know that because they've had votes on some of this. Now, when I mentioned Said, she walked out of the room saying, Meir Kahane was right. And we both immediately knew what it was. Meir Kahane was the rabbi, one of whose followers went into an Arab church, I think it was a church, took a machine gun before we had all these high school kids doing it, and killed 39 people.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Now, it would be hard to figure out for sure that from Meir Kahane is right, that she was talking about they should all be shot or pushed into the ocean. But that was the implication of it. And finding and fixing that kind of stuff, misinformation, hate speech, and possibly now the 10 or 20% of the internet that you're not allowed to access in Texas a year from now.
No, really? Wow.
They just did some incredible legislation in the Texas Assembly. It'll probably get knocked out, and the governor sponsored it and signed it. It'll probably get knocked out, but we don't know that, especially what the court is. And I think it's time for a break. So let me hold that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Let's come back to that, Dave. Okay, thanks. You're listening to Community Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
There's a saying old, says that love is blind. Still I'm often told, seeking ye shall find. So I'm going to seek a certain lad I've had in mind. Looking everywhere, I haven't found him yet. He's the big affair I cannot forget. Only man I ever think of with regret. I'd like to add his initial to my monogram. Tell me, where is the shepherd for this lost lamb? There's a somebody I'm longing to see. I hope that he turns out to be someone who'll watch over me. me. Although he may not be the man some girls think of as handsome, to my heart he carries the key. Won't you tell him please to put on some speed, follow my lead? Oh, how I need someone to watch
Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We've been talking about ChatGPT and some of the other generative software and where that's going and some of the problems with it. Dave, there's a story in the Times today you wanted to talk to us about, yes?
Yeah, we were talking about not sending, of course, ChatGPT texts that they don't want to put out there. Death threats, hate speech, child pornography, and so on. So one of the things that's happening is there are probably 100 people at OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, and Google's team, who are just figuring out new and better ways to filter them out. They all know it'll never be perfect, but they all know, starting with the CEO of OpenAI, and I've got the interview, know there are big problems here to solve. Now, when I said that, I said, it could be 10% of the internet. And you looked at me and said, yeah, actually, it could be, because if you cut out pornography, you will lose 10% of the internet. But it's not going to eliminate porn in the state of Texas, where the governor just signed and supported this bill. It's going to try to make it impossible, or almost impossible, for anybody under 18 to access it. Now, Stu, if you had a billion friends, as Facebook does, they're actually well above that now. Some of them are going to be doing really ugly things. They're going to be doing this at a rate of, I don't know how many tens of millions of messages every day. Probably hundreds of millions.
Yeah, you got 1 billion users. I mean, just a small, tiny fraction of that is millions.
Yeah. So how would you catch as much of it as possible going to somebody under 18?
I have no idea. I mean, you think you try and write an algorithm, but I don't know how you do that.
One thing that will not work is what's usually done. The current limit in the US is you can't send some things to kids under 13. This would raise it to 18 and make it serious criminal violations.
This is a new law in Texas that you're talking about now, Dave, right?
Yeah. This is a new law in Texas, and Florida has one just like it coming. And my source on this is the New York Times, so it's probably right. And what will not work is the way it works now. That when I go to certain websites, I have to click on something that says I'm more than 21 years old before they send me what they have, which is porn. Not that that's a big thing to me, but I don't think it should be illegal. Their other one is the kids under 13. And how do you find out? Or no, because we're now looking at kids. It was kids under 13, and soon it's going to be kids under 18 who have to get their parents' permission to access certain material, not just adults, a whole lot of stuff. And not only get their parents' permission, they actually have ways to check it fairly well. An awful lot of kids have credit cards these days, driver's licenses, which I don't remember. Mm-hmm. And all the data that we've been talking about that goes around the internet, name, address, and age, is available from hundreds of data brokers around the world. Not everyone, but it would be a pain in the butt to figure out how to get around all that, which is what the governor said. He said, it's not going to be perfect. Kids today are really smart, and they will crack. Mm-hmm.
So, how does this proposal work? I mean, what is it? What is he saying that internet sites are going to have to do?
They're going to have to look at what they have, say, and measure any of their content that is not appropriate. I don't know the particulars of it. I know pornography is it, but there's not just child pornography, any pornography. There's lots more. Remember, don't say gay in California. No, in Florida, rather. Mm-hmm. And I have some friends in California who would not want to go over the internet. A lot of things being said by the friends of this Texas governor and Florida governor, who's running for president, incidentally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So every state, every website would have to filter what it sent out and only send it to those who have proven they're over 18, at least in the United States. Mm. That felt like totally impossible. Mm-hmm. But then I realized how much data the data brokers have out there that you could probably pick up the age of 9 out of 10 kids who are 14 years old. I guess. I certainly haven't tried the example. And that's going to happen and going to be really serious. Now, so how do you filter out those kids? Well, it means you have to get everybody signing on and giving you some evidence they are who they say they are. In other words, you can't be anonymous on the web. You're going to have certain things blocked from you. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that whole lots of people, including several of the engineers who built the internet, think would be a good thing. That anonymous speech, which we think of as fine in America, in England is liable. And if they could figure out who actually said something on a website, well, it's actually in court in England trying to get Google to give them the names of who was behind certain statements that would be fine here in the US, but were absolutely liable in England because they have very different law on this.
Now, how about anonymous search, Dave? I mean, it sounds like this law would even block search. If I can't prove that I'm 18 years or older, I can't search for certain topics or certain things. Is that
absolutely?
Mm-hmm. And absolutely. The flip side of that is I gotta say who I am in order to search. If I'm an adult, I gotta identify myself as such in order to search. Is that right?
And we know that there's a price to pay by battered women and journalists around most of the world. Remember, I don't know how many they killed in Mexico this year, right next to us, but I think it's in the dozens in the last year. Okay, and you might be someone who is working some oil trades and not approved that were detrimental to the state of Abu Dhabi, about $200 million worth of oil trades. This is a true story. Sitting in the New Yorker, and we know it's true, because somebody hacked the service area for
Mhm.
several million dollars. A well-known private investigator will find a way to destroy somebody's reputation. In this case, there was an oil trader that for some reason was doing things that Abu Dhabi, which is a huge oil producer, didn't like. So Abu Dhabi said, get him out of here. Discredit him totally. So this was the one where, in fact, the Times of London picked up one of the fake stories that was set out by this investigative agency. And so did at least a half dozen other media. That's how many they have, probably in other places. They were very good. Worked with Noel before, were known as the go-to person for this. And for several million dollars, had half the world, well, no, had half the world that was interested in this fellow and what he does, anybody who ever Googled him, thinking he was a terrorist.
Wow.
If you put his name into the homepage of Google, they probably, hopefully fixed it by now, but when these guys were going, probably 4 out of 5 items on that page will somehow or other say he was a terror. He's connected with terrorists and sending money to Al Qaeda. Now, what was the evidence that they put in these articles and all these claims? Well, not he, but the father of somebody he worked with had been identified as sending money to Al Qaeda. And that turned around into London Times stories about this grand terrorist in Switzerland, where they were all working on this, feeding Al Qaeda. And most of the reporters didn't trust it, but some did. And you send out 5,000 stories like that.
Wow.
I can give you a story just like that. They didn't use ChatGPT. They actually used $1,000 an hour Washington lawyer to do
So
this.
it's just subversive information, just flooding certain information sources on the internet.
Yeah, and if you want to destroy somebody's career, this guy who was doing $200 million a year of oil trading and had been for 10 years, lost his entire company.
Wow.
Probably he thinks that's why he lost his wife. And he's going to come back and do okay, because apparently he had held $20 million outside of it. And on $20 million, he's going to do okay. The agency we're talking about, as I say, this is straight from the New Yorker, had proposals to do this to something like 20 governments and large corporations.
We're prepared to go after this guy?
Not this guy, to go after their enemies.
Wow.
Whether they are. And it was amazing. I almost didn't believe it, but the New Yorker has always been famous for fact checking. And even if there were half of the things that were put in this article true, it was absolutely. Now, who can use this and who can't? Well, that actually came out of the White House yesterday. Did you see what Biden signed on to?
No, I didn't. What did he sign on to today?
It is now possible to crack almost any phone in the world, although very few people can do it. There's one outfit that comes out of Israel that's known, another one in Italy, and they really will charge $1 million to crack it. But the information that you get, the cracking, the personal information, you can put up out there so fast, so many places. that you will destroy the reputation of most people. I
So,
mean,
so what
destroy
was that
the
Biden
fact
put out? What,
that his wife's bank account was shut down by this for a Swiss bank he had been doing business with for years. Not just his bank account, his wife's.
so I mean, what did Biden put out? How is Biden playing into this whole scenario?
Well, so we know what's happening out there. We know what Palantir can do getting information on people. We know that you can identify 99% of the people who walked into Madison Square Garden. And in fact, Madison Square Garden is doing just that and stopping people they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Lawyers happen to be suing them, were thrown out of the garden.
Yeah.
Real story. And Biden put out the information that, except in extraordinary circumstances, which he probably meant, the United States cannot pay anybody else to do that hacking using these big models. Definitely moving in the right direction.
We say anybody else. I mean, break it down. I mean that there are only certain folks that can do the hacking on behalf of the government.
Yeah, but there are a lot of folks who can go up there, pick up some information about somebody, and put out 100 articles and search engine optimize and get it noticed. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's what's done by people who have a problem with credit scores and so on. You flood the internet with things like that about yourself that are positive. Now, there's a very big loophole, two very big loopholes in this. First, it's not covering everybody everywhere. The United States government, for example, if they wanted to kill somebody in Mali, could find the two investigators in Mali who are capable of getting this information on anybody in the country who uses computers and sell it to the US. Mm-hmm. So they can't buy it from American data brokers. But the other one that's even busy, it excluded all US government. And
so Biden excluded US companies from selling data. I mean, I'm still a little confused, Dave. What his initiative does.
His initiative says that US government bodies can't pay anybody to go out and find this data in a way that would be illegal.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But you're saying they're all kind of workarounds. They're workarounds. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, his heart's in the right place on this. He's doing more than anybody else except the Chinese. Well, how much time do we have?
We're just about out of time. Before we go, I wanted to get your reaction. There's a story about Section 230 and whether or not that's going to apply to AI chatbots. And of course, Section 230 is a part of the Communications Act from, I think, 1996 law that shields content hosts like
on Google,
and
so
others,
on, that unless they're actively involved with
lawsuit for content that's harmful or illegal or libelous on their platforms. And so it's about there's a current a case before the Supreme Court where that's being challenged, where I think there was some terrorist postings on Google, and they're being sued. That's in the court, and some folks are talking about and actually asked one of the justices about whether AI chatbots was going to be covered under 230, and I think it was Gorsuch that said no, he didn't think so. That the AI chatbots and those types of services would not be protected by Section 230. Because
he's probably right on the way the law is written. Because when Sarah Deutsch and a few friends of hers in Washington in 1996 got this into the big Telecom Act, they weren't thinking about automatically generated text by the hundreds, thousands, and tens of millions on any topic you wanted.
Mhm.
Now, they stop what they can, but there are going to be lots of ways to get around it.
Mhm.
So, what happens if I went to Google? What's the thing called? Bald? No, to
Bard,
Google it.
Bard,
Bard?
B-A-R-D.
Yeah, Bard, and said, give me 100 examples using Hollywood actors doing something that is not going to exactly hit the filter. And you find out what's in the filter pretty easily by testing it.
Mhm.
Now, Google's Bard did create that text. Is Google responsible for that child pornography site? And there's a lot of people, including the governors of Texas and Florida, who thinks Google should be. It's a hard one to say,
Mhm.
but these kinds of things never happened, never got through. Every time they have communications decency acts, and all this stuff that was trying to censor the internet, the response in Washington by some people I know, some people who hate me, a lot of people who cared about the internet, and then the companies included were those who were selling the internet, Verizon and Comcast and Google. And Google was the heaviest lobbyist on this publicly. Facebook was really big and so on. And we're able to stop all the ridiculous legislation. Or regulation would mean they had to change their business model. But unfortunately, there's a paranoid tendency in American politics. Some of us think it's what's been happening the last few years, but actually that's the title of a book that I believe is in about the 1900s. Paranoid tendency. And they have been spreading the word massively, including by the president, that Google and Facebook and so on are liberals who are not saying what the conservatives want, that the conservatives are all being censored, which probably isn't true in any way. I mean, I'm sure you can find certain examples because they block a whole lot of things and so on. But the result was there were many of the top Republicans, including our last president, thinks that this protection from Google, that they don't have to find some way when they get 20 million uploads to YouTube a day and things like that to check each one of them. And that's going to go to the Supreme Court, and it's going to start in the States.
Mhm.
And there are actually some cases that are related to that.
Okay. Well, we got to keep an eye on that, David. In the meantime, we are out of time. This is fascinating stuff. We've been talking about Chat GPT and AI and large language models and the larger societal effects and just now what the courts are going to rule, whether or not some of these big platforms are protected from crazy stuff or negative stuff or hateful stuff that might get published on their platforms.
Which you can't get rid of without getting rid of a whole lot of stuff that is not hateful. Because nobody can filter it that well.
Yeah,
That was always the free speech argument.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
And so on.
To be continued. Thanks, Dave.
Well, I believe it is going to seriously change the world over the next 10 or 20 or 1 or 2 years.
Okay.
It's so powerful. And there's a whole lot of people who agree with me. Okay. Some of whom, 10% of the computer scientists and the like, who were asked in a large survey lately, thought that there would be intelligent robots, general intelligence, autonomous general intelligence, maybe next year. Some people think it's like that. A lot of people think 10 or 20 years. Others say, yeah, it's going to happen, but maybe a few hundred years. No,
I think it's going to be sooner than that. Okay, we're out of time, Dave. This has been Community and Technology, Dave Burstein and Stu Reid, exploring some fascinating topics around artificial intelligence and the latest evolution, ChatGPT and generative software. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Be sure and tune in. You just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.